Hello, in this video I want to show you how to fix the IP of your PIG server, be it your PC or a Raspberry Pi, and your DVR. I'm going to say fixed IP instead of static IP because the static IP you change your PC's mode and your Raspberry Pi mode and your DVR's mode. But here I'm going to use the router to fix the IP so that it's always the same. I think it's a little easier than having to change settings on a lot of different computers. Here you can do it all in one place. First thing I need to do is log into my router, and I happen to know mine is 192.168.1.1. You can find that out looking on the bottom of your router, or if you look at the IP address of, say, your phone, advanced settings, and it says your phone's IP is like 1.72, then you know that you changed the 72 to a 1, the base address, and that's where your router is. If it was 10 dot something, then you would use a 10.1. If it was 0.7, then the router would be at 0.1. So here we go, logging onto my router. And it needs the password, which if you don't know it, it's probably printed on the bottom of your router. So this router's kind of weird. It's got all kinds of funny names for everything, but what you want to go find is sometimes there'll be something about WAN settings, W-A-N, and LAN, L-A-N settings. In this one, you can get there various ways by clicking on this local 28. That's not intuitive. But we can do connectivity here. I need to click on the local network tab right here. And you can see my router's at 1.1. And then it tells us a lot about the router. But what I want to do, there's always a place to, often there's a place where you can reserve certain addresses. And here's the button that lets me do that. So I'm going to click on that. And now it brings up DHCP reservations. And the way this works is every device on your network has a little MAC address. This is the hardware address of your thing. And when you reserve an IP, what the router does is it says, anytime this device 0C6E comes and asks me for an IP address, I'm always going to give it address 4. This happens to be a printer on my network, and I don't want the address to change so that all computers can always find it. So what do we need to do here? I needed to, on the previous video, if you remember, the DVR was address 151, so I'm going to select that. And my PC's address was 186, and here's that one. So I'm going to click those, and then I'm going to say add DHCP reservation, and look what happened. It added them to this list up here. So now when my PC MAC address E0C8 comes and asks for an address, it's always going to get 186. And if the this is a little weird because I'm actually going to change the DVR to static IP, but by me putting this in here in this list, the router is never going to give away 151 to another device. I can use it if I want to. So there we go. I've reserved those two addresses. I say OK. Router is applying changes, which I don't know if it means it's going to reboot. We'll see. And okay, so we're done. We now have fixed IPs. It means, again, that the router is always going to give out, we're ensured by the router that the same address will be given out to those two devices. The PC, address 186, and my DVR address 151. And so now what I did in the first video where I said I was going to ignore them, well, now I've made it so that it'll work. So all I have to do is say OK here, and we're done. Now, if I truly wanted to do static IPs of my of a device on my network, what I have to do is make sure that I don't overlap with the addresses I pick with the addresses that the router is going to hand out. And that information's right here. It says that the starting address is address 2. Remember, .1 is reserved for the router itself. The router is allowed to hand out 198 addresses, the maximum being up to 254. So what it's saying right here is this automatic DHCP, automatic addressing range that the router can hand out is from 1.2 to 1.99. And what that means is I am in control of address 200 to 254. I can hand those out any way I want. So I could set my PC, the way I actually have my network set up is I have 192.168 1.200 set up to be my Raspberry Pi pigs, and then some of my DVRs set up to be .201 and .202. And since the router will never give those addresses out, I can make them anything I want if they're above 200. Your router might look a little different. For example, it might say, hey, let's see if I can do this. Start at 100, and it's an invalid number of users, so I'm going to put 100 here. And you can see, whoops, put that back there. It didn't like it. So here, this time, you can see that the ranges start at 100 and go up to 199, which means I can hand out manually 2 to 99 and do whatever I want with them. If you have to change this, you'll have to be careful. Some of your devices might need new addresses after this, but hopefully yours will already have some reserved addresses and so a range for some fixed addresses. And if you just look here, it'll kind of tell you what range you can use for the static addresses that you pick. And anything you pick, you got to keep track of on a piece of paper so you know that which devices have which addresses. So anyway, that's where you look for your static IP address information. I'm going to cancel because I don't want to change mine. All right, that's it.